They said the corner office on the 48th floor was cursed. 5 secretaries had quit in 5 weeks, 1 left in tears, 1 left in an ambulance due to a mysterious panic attack, and 3 simply never answered their phones again. To the corporate world, Lorenzo Moretti was just the ruthless CEO of a global shipping empire. To the underworld, he was the untouchable boss of the Sicilian syndicate operating out of New York. His office was a lion's den, where one wrong look could end a career or a life. No one survived his temper. No one lasted a week, until a chronically clumsy girl with $30 to her name tripped over his Persian rug and sent a cup of scalding espresso flying, changing the power dynamics of the entire East Coast Mafia forever. The Manhattan skyline was a jagged gray against the November rain as Chloe Jenkins stood outside the towering glass monolith of Moretti Logistics. She was 24, drowning in $80,000 of her mother's medical debt, and currently wearing a thrifted beige trench coat that was missing 2 buttons. They paid triple the market rate, Chloe, but I have to warn you. Brenda Carmichael, the senior recruiter at Apex Corporate Staffing, had told her over the phone that morning. Brenda's voice had been tight, dropping an octave as if she were afraid of being wiretapped. Mr. Moretti goes through assistants like water. He is exacting. He is unforgiving. If you breathe too loudly, you're fired. Just keep your head down, do the filing, and do not, under any circumstances, look in his private ledgers. Chloe didn't care if Lorenzo Moretti was the devil himself. Triple the market rate meant she could stop dodging calls from debt collectors. She gripped her imitation leather portfolio, took a deep breath, and walked through the revolving doors into the expanse of Italian marble and brushed steel. The 48th floor was entirely silent. It didn't buzz with the usual corporate hum of ringing phones and clacking keyboards. It felt like a mausoleum. Chloe approached the massive mahogany desk situated outside a set of imposing double doors. The previous secretary's nameplate was already in the trash can. Before she could even sit down, the double doors violently swung open. A man in a sharp slate-gray suit was practically thrown out, stumbling over his own feet. If the shipment at the Brooklyn docks is intercepted again, a voice roared from within the office, deep, resonant, and laced with a thick Sicilian accent that sent a shiver down Chloe's spine. I won't just fire you, Albert. I will make sure you never walk near a body of water again. Get out. Albert scurried away, his face pale as a ghost, not even glancing at Chloe. Chloe stood frozen. In the doorway stood Lorenzo Moretti. He was a force of nature, towering at 6'3", dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that hugged the broad lines of his shoulders perfectly. His hair was jet black, slightly disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration, and his eyes a piercing, icy amber locked onto her. He looked less like a shipping executive and more like a predator, assessing a very small, very out-of-place bird. "Who are you?" he snapped, his voice dropping from a roar to a dangerous, deadly quiet. I'm Chloe," she stammered, immediately dropping her portfolio. As she scrambled to pick it up, her knee hit the heavy mahogany desk, sending a decorative crystal paperweight crashing to the floor. It shattered into a dozen pieces. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the eruption. She was fired. She hadn't even clocked in, and she was already fired. Instead, she heard a slow, heavy exhale. "Apex Staffing sent you," Lorenzo stated, rubbing his temples as if staving off a migraine. "Yes, Mr. Moretti. I am so sorry about the paperweight. I'll pay for it out of my first paycheck, if I get a paycheck, that is." Lorenzo stared at her. His previous secretaries had been polished, terrifying the efficient women who walked on eggshells and wore designer heels. This girl was wearing scuffed loafers and looking at him with large, terrified hazel eyes, trembling like a leaf. "Clean it up," he said coldly, and bring me a black espresso. No sugar. If it has even a grain of sugar in it, you're fired." He turned back into his office, leaving the doors open. Chloe spent the next 10 minutes on her hands and knees picking up crystal shards, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she finally made her way to the executive kitchenette, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely operate the commercial espresso machine. She walked into his office, carefully balancing the tiny porcelain cup on its saucer. Lorenzo was seated behind his massive desk, speaking rapidly and rapid-fire Italian into a burner phone. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man organizing a war. "I don't care what Matteo Rossi thinks. The territory is ours. If Rossi moves his product through the South Port, burn the warehouse down," Lorenzo commanded into the phone. Chloe froze. "Burn the warehouse down?" Lorenzo hung up and looked at her, his amber eyes narrowing. "Do you speak Italian, Miss Jenkins?" "No," she lied quickly, swallowing hard. She didn't. She only knew the word for burn because her grandmother used to yell it when cooking. But the tone implied violence, real violence. "Good. Put the coffee down and organize the files on the left. Do not touch the red leather book on the right," Chloe nodded, stepping forward. But as she did, the heel of her scuffed loafer caught the edge of the thick, antique Persian rug. It happened in slow motion. Chloe tripped forward. Her arms flailed, the saucer tipped, and the scalding black espresso launched itself through the air, landing squarely on the lapel of Lorenzo Moretti's $3,000 suit, splashing across the pristine white collar of his shirt. Chloe hit the floor hard, gasping as the breath was knocked out of her. She lay there for a second, staring at the intricate patterns of the rug. Well, she thought, at least the debt collectors won't be able to find my body. "Get up." The voice wasn't yelling. It was a terrifying low hiss. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her face burning with humiliation and terror. Lorenzo was standing, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His fists were clenched at his sides, the knuckles stark white. His jaw ticked. "Mr. Moretti." Quiet. He grabbed a linen handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed uselessly at the stain. He closed his eyes, taking a breath so deep his chest expanded significantly. "In 5 weeks I have had a woman who stole corporate secrets, a woman who tried to sleep with me to get a promotion, and a woman who cried when I asked her to use a stapler. You were the first one to physically assault me with a beverage." "I tripped," Chloe whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm clumsy. I have a problem with spatial awareness. I'll leave right now." She turned toward the door, wrapping her arms around herself. She had failed. Back to the eviction notices. "Did I tell you to leave?" Chloe stopped in her tracks, looking back over her shoulder. Lorenzo was unbuttoning his ruined suit jacket, tossing it over the back of his leather chair. Beneath it, his white dress shirt clung to the hard, muscular lines of his chest. He looked thoroughly exhausted. "Dominic is coming in 10 minutes, Lorenzo muttered almost to himself. "I don't have time to interview another incompetent fool today. Take my jacket to the dry cleaner downstairs. Under the desk, you'll find a box of files. Sort them by date. If you spill anything else, I will throw you out of that window." He pointed to the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Manhattan. He wasn't joking. Chloe nodded vigorously, snatched the ruined jacket, and bolted out of the room. Over the next 4 days, Chloe operated in a state of high-alert survival. The Father was a bizarre ecosystem. Lorenzo was rarely doing shipping work. Instead, rough-looking men in expensive suits constantly filtered in and out of the office. There were hushed conversations about shipments, collections, and Rossi's crew. Her clumsiness did not magically disappear, but it morphed. On Tuesday, she accidentally shredded a takeout menu instead of a sensitive document, which ironically saved Lorenzo from eating at a restaurant that, she later found out on the news, had been raided by the FBI for money laundering. On Wednesday, she dropped a stack of heavy binders exactly as a very intimidating, heavily scarred man named Dominic Rousseau Lorenzo's underboss, though she didn't know the title yet, was walking in. Dominic had to jump back to avoid getting his foot crushed, completely derailing his angry tirade about a missing shipment of weapons. Lorenzo had watched her that Wednesday from behind his desk, a strange, calculating look in his amber eyes. He hadn't fired her. In fact, he had almost looked amused. Then came Thursday afternoon. Lorenzo was in a meeting in the glass-walled conference room down the hall. Chloe was at his desk, organizing the week's chaotic paperwork. She saw it sitting there, the red ledger. Brenda from Apex had warned her. Lorenzo had warned her. It was a thick, vintage, leather-bound book, completely out of place among the modern iPads and sleek laptops. She wasn't going to touch it, but as she reached across the desk to grab a stray pen, her sleeve caught the heavy silver letter opener, which tipped over, knocking into a stack of files which slid directly onto the red ledger, knocking it onto the floor. "Oh God," Chloe panicked, dropping to her knees. The ledger had fallen open. Loose pages of handwritten notes had spilled out across the hardwood floor beneath the desk. Chloe scrambled to gather them. She didn't mean to look, but she had always been good with numbers. It was why she handled her mother's medical billing. As she stacked the loose pages to put them back into the book, her eyes caught the columns of figures. They were financial records. Port fees, storage costs, security payouts. But something was glaringly wrong. Chloe squinted, sitting back on her heels. The totals at the bottom of the page for the Brooklyn South ports didn't match the sum of the weekly entries. There was a repeating discrepancy. Someone was moving the decimal point on the third week of every month, shifting exactly $150,000 out of the total. Over a year, that was nearly $2 million. "What are you doing?" The voice was like a whip cracking in the silent room. Chloe gasped, dropping the papers. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. Dominic Rousseau stood right behind him, his hand instinctively moving toward the inside of his jacket. "I knocked it over," Chloe babbled, scrambling back until her back hit the mahogany desk. I'm so sorry, my sleeve caught the opener." Lorenzo crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He didn't look at her. He looked at the open ledger on the floor. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked violently near his ear. He crouched down, picking up the pages. "You read this," Lorenzo stated. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. "No, yes, just a glance," Chloe cried, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I didn't mean to. I just saw the numbers, and they were wrong, and I was trying to put them back." Lorenzo froze. He slowly turned his head to look at her. "What did you say?" Dominic stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. "Enzo, she's a liability. We handle this now." "Shut up, Dom," Lorenzo said softly, never breaking eye contact with Chloe. "What do you mean the numbers were wrong?" Chloe swallowed hard. She was terrified, but the numbers were the only thing making sense in her head right now. The Brooklyn Southport page. Whoever does the arithmetic is either terrible at math or they're stealing from you. They're dropping 150 grand every third week. It's hidden in the carrying cost column, but if you carry the 1, the total is short. Silence fell over the room again. It was heavier this time. Lorenzo looked down at the page in his hand. His amber eyes scanned the columns rapidly. Then he looked at Dominic. Dominic's face had gone pale. "Enzo, Carlo handles the Brooklyn books. He's been with the family for 20 years. Carlo is a dead man," Lorenzo whispered. He looked back at Chloe, who was still cowering against the desk. The sheer, unadulterated ruthlessness in his expression vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by something akin to shock. 5 highly trained Mafia accountants hadn't caught the skim. His clumsy, terrified 24-year-old secretary, who wore scuffed shoes and couldn't pour a cup of coffee without causing a disaster, had unraveled a $2 million theft by dropping a book on the floor. Lorenzo stood up. He reached down, grasped Chloe's upper arm with a strong, warm hand, and pulled her to her feet. "Miss Jenkins," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "cancel my afternoon appointments. You and I are going shopping. You need a dress. Shopping." Chloe echoed, her voice trembling. Am I being fired or killed?" Dominic barked a harsh laugh from the corner of the room. Lorenzo shot him a silencing glare before looking back at Chloe. "If I wanted you dead, Miss Jenkins, you wouldn't have made it past the espresso incident on Monday. No, tomorrow night is the annual Maritime Charity Gala at the Waldorf Astoria. Every major shipping executive in the Northeast will be there." His eyes darkened, including Matteo Rossi. "And Carlo, what does that have to do with me?" Because Lorenzo stepped closer, his presence entirely overwhelming, smelling of expensive cologne and danger. "Carlo knows I employ aggressive auditors. He knows I am paranoid, but he also knows I just hired a hopelessly clumsy, timid girl from a temp agency who breaks my crystal. You are the perfect cover." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. "Cover for what?" "For observing," Lorenzo said smoothly. "You have a mind for numbers, an eye for details that don't fit. At the gala, you will be by my side. You will watch Carlo. You will watch who he speaks to, especially if he speaks to Matteo Rossi. If Rossi is backing Carlo's theft, we have a war on our hands. Mr. Moretti, I can't be in a mob war. I just need to pay off my mom's hospital bills." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Lorenzo paused. The hardness in his eyes softened just a millimeter. "Your mother is ill?" Chloe looked down, ashamed. "She passed away last year. The treatments, they didn't work. The debt did, though. It survived just fine." Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. In his world, weakness was a liability. Leverage was meant to be exploited. But looking at the girl in the thrift store trench coat, he felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. $50,000, Lorenzo said suddenly. Chloe snapped her head up. "What? You attend the gala? You act as my eyes. You do exactly as I say. Tomorrow night I will wire $50,000 directly to your creditors." Chloe couldn't breathe. $50,000. It would cut her debt down to a manageable fraction. It was life-changing. It was a deal with the devil. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I'll do it." The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom was a sea of glittering chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and the quiet, dangerous hum of powerful people pretending to be civilized. Chloe felt like an imposter. Lorenzo had sent her to a private boutique on Fifth Avenue, putting the entire tab on his black card. She was currently wearing a floor-length, deep emerald silk gown that clung to her curves in a way that made her blush every time she caught her reflection. Her hair was swept up elegantly, and she wore a pair of diamond teardrop earrings that Lorenzo had casually handed to her in the limousine, claiming they were props for the evening. When Lorenzo had seen her step into his private elevator that evening, he had stopped dead in his tracks. The ruthless Mafia boss had actually lost his words for 3 full seconds, staring at her with an intensity that made Chloe's stomach do backflips. "Stay close to me," Lorenzo murmured, now his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as they navigated the crowded ballroom. His touch burned through the thin silk of her dress. "I'm trying," Chloe hissed under her breath, trying not to trip over her own hem. "But everyone is staring at us." "They are staring at you," Lorenzo corrected quietly, a hint of possessive pride in his tone that he quickly masked. Look toward the ice sculpture, 3 o'clock. Chloe discreetly turned her head. Standing by a massive melting swan was an older, sweating man in a tuxedo. Carlo. He was nervously twisting a cocktail napkin. He looks panicked, Chloe observed. He should be, Lorenzo replied coldly. Now look who was approaching him. A tall, sharp-featured man with slicked-back graying hair and a cruel smile walked up to Carlo. He clapped Carlo on the shoulder, leaning in to whisper something. Matteo Rossi, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. So, Rossi is the one taking the skimmed money. He's funding an expansion using my own cash. Mr. Moretti Lorenzo, Chloe said, feeling a sudden spike of real dread. Carlo just handed him something, a valet ticket maybe. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Good catch, Chloe. It was the first time he had used her first name. It sounded like velvet wrapped around steel. Rossi is leaving early. He's going to his car to retrieve whatever Carlo just gave him access to. Probably the offshore account fobs. What do? We follow him out, quietly. Lorenzo's hand tightened on her waist, guiding her out of the ballroom and into the opulent, dimly lit corridors of the Waldorf. The music faded behind them. They stepped out into the side valet alley. The November air was biting cold. Chloe shivered, her emerald dress doing nothing to stop the chill. Lorenzo immediately shrugged off his tailored tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of his body heat and his intoxicating scent enveloped her. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him. In the shadows of the alley, Lorenzo looked down at her. The adrenaline of the night, the sheer difference between this innocent girl and his dark world, struck him. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing against her cheekbone. "You did well tonight, Piccola," he murmured. Before Chloe could process the intimate gesture, the heavy steel door to the underground garage banged open 20 yards away. Matteo Rossi stepped out, accompanied by 2 massive bodyguards. Lorenzo instantly shoved Chloe behind him, his hand moving to the holster concealed under his arm. Rossi spotted them. His cruel smile widened. "Enzo, leaving so soon? Or did you come down here to fire your accountant?" "I came down here to take back what belongs to me, Matteo," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing in the concrete alley. "The money Carlo diverted. Hand over the drives." "Oak. Rossi laughed. It was a dry, grating sound. "You're getting soft, Enzo, bringing a civilian to a shakedown." Rossi nodded to his bodyguards. "Kill them both. Leave the girl's face intact. She's too pretty to ruin." Chloe's heart stopped. One of the bodyguards drew a suppressed weapon with terrifying speed. Lorenzo drew his own gun, but the bodyguard already had the drop on him. The barrel was pointed directly at Lorenzo's chest. Panic exploded in Chloe's brain. She couldn't think. She just reacted. She lunged forward, grabbing the back of Lorenzo's shirt to pull him back. But as she did, the heel of her designer stiletto snapped cleanly off on a raised cobblestone. With a shriek, Chloe pitched forward, her entire body weight slamming into Lorenzo's back. The collision sent them both crashing to the hard concrete. Twip, thwip. 2 silenced bullets tore through the air exactly where Lorenzo's chest had been a fraction of a second prior. They shattered the brick wall behind them. Lorenzo hit the ground, rolling seamlessly. Before the bodyguard could adjust his aim downwards, Lorenzo fired twice. The bodyguard dropped. The second guard hesitated, shocked by the sudden chaos. Lorenzo didn't miss a beat. A third shot rang out, and the second guard fell, gripping his shoulder, screaming. Matteo Rossi, his face pale with sudden terror, dropped the valet ticket and bolted back into the garage. Silence descended on the alley, save for the groans of the wounded guard and the heavy, ragged breathing of Lorenzo Moretti. Lorenzo slowly pushed himself up off the ground, keeping his gun trained on the garage door. Once he was sure Rossi was gone, he turned frantically. Chloe was curled on the concrete, clutching her ankle, Lorenzo's tuxedo jacket tangled around her. She was shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. Lorenzo dropped to his knees beside her, dropping the gun. His hands hovered over her, terrified to touch her, terrified he might find blood. "Chloe, Chloe, look at me," he commanded, his voice raw with a panic that his enemies had never ever seen. "Are you hit? Where are you bleeding?" "I'm not," she sobbed, gasping for air. She held up her foot. "I broke the shoe. I tripped. I ruined the dress." Lorenzo stared at the broken heel. He looked at the bullet holes in the brick wall right where his heart had been. Then he looked back at the tear-stained, terrified face of the clumsy girl who had just, completely by accident, saved his life. A choked, breathless laugh escaped Lorenzo's lips. It was a sound he hadn't made in a decade. He pulled Chloe off the concrete, crushing her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could feel the frantic beating of his heart. "You ruined the dress," he whispered into her hair, closing his eyes as he held her in the cold alleyway. "Miss Jenkins, you are going to be the death of me, or my absolute salvation." The sleek, bulletproof SUV tore through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, running 3 red lights before merging onto the West Side Highway. Inside the dark cabin, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers and Chloe's ragged breathing. She was still wearing Lorenzo's oversized tuxedo jacket. Her ruined emerald gown was stained with alleyway soot, and she held her broken stiletto in her lap like a useless weapon. Lorenzo sat next to her, a phantom in the dim light. He was barking orders in rapid-fire Italian into a burner phone, his voice hard, authoritative, and entirely terrifying. He hung up and tossed the phone onto the center console, finally turning to look at her. "Breathe, Chloe," he commanded softly. "You are going into shock. Take a deep breath." "A man shot at you," she managed to whisper, her teeth chattering. "You shot people. There was blood on the concrete." "Oh, welcome to my world," Lorenzo said, the brutal honesty cutting through the air. He reached across the leather seat, taking her trembling hands in his large, warm ones. His thumbs rubbed soothing circles over her knuckles. "Rossi made a play. It was sloppy, and it failed because of you. But it means the Cold War is over. I just wanted to pay my medical bills." A tear slit down her cheek, leaving a clean trail through the faint smudge of dirt on her face. "I can't be part of this. I have a cat. I have to go home to my apartment in Queens." Lorenzo's amber eyes darkened. He looked at the privacy partitions separating them from the driver, then back to her. "You don't have an apartment in Queens anymore." Chloe froze. "What?" Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "Dominic, just left your building in Astoria. 10 minutes after we left the Waldorf, Rossi's men kicked your door in. They tossed the place looking for you. If you hadn't come to the gala. If I had sent you home at 5 o'clock like a normal secretary." He stopped, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second, as if the thought physically pained him. "They would have killed you to punish me." The air left Chloe's lungs in a rush. "My cat," she squeaked out, terrified of the answer. "Dominic found the cat hiding in the ceiling tiles," Lorenzo assured her quickly, sensing her rising panic. "He has the animal, but you cannot go back there. Rossi saw your face. He saw you with me. In his eyes, you aren't a temp worker. You are a prized asset. You are coming with me." The SUV pulled into a heavily fortified underground parking garage beneath a towering, ultra-modern high-rise on Harrison Street in Tribeca. This wasn't the corporate office. This was Lorenzo's private fortress. 15 minutes later, Chloe found herself sitting on the edge of a massive, cloud-like sofa in a penthouse that looked like it belonged in an architectural digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, dizzying view of the Hudson River. Lorenzo emerged from a hallway carrying a custom leather medical kit. He had discarded his tie and unbuttoned the first 3 buttons of his ruined white shirt, rolling up the sleeves to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint, faded scars. He knelt on the plush rug in front of her. Without asking, he gently lifted her right leg, resting her bare foot on his knee. Chloe gasped, her face flushing a deep crimson as his warm fingers brushed her ankle. "I can do it," she stammered, trying to pull her leg back. "Hold still," he ordered, though there was no malice in his tone. He opened an alcohol wipe. "You scraped your knee and ankle when you dragged me down. It needs to be cleaned." As the alcohol stung her skin, Chloe hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the sofa. Lorenzo blew softly on the scrape, the gesture so shockingly tender that Chloe forgot how to breathe. The ruthless head of the Sicilian syndicate was on his knees playing nurse to a clumsy temp. "I wired the money," Lorenzo said quietly, not looking up as he applied a bandage. "What?" "The $50,000. While we were in the car. It's in your Chase account. The swift transfer will clear by morning. Your mother's debt is handled." He finally looked up, his amber eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race faster than the gunfire had. "I keep my promises, Chloe, and I promise you this, Rossi will never touch you. You are under my protection now." Chloe stared at him. She was terrified of him, terrified of his world. Yet looking into those golden brown eyes, surrounded by the scent of his cologne and gunpowder, she felt an absurd, irrational sense of total safety. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Lorenzo said, standing up, "because tomorrow we are tearing my company apart to find out how deep Carlo's rot goes." Chloe couldn't sleep. The guest bedroom Lorenzo had given her was larger than her entire apartment, featuring a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the muzzle flash in the alleyway. At 3 a.m., she gave up. Wearing a pair of Lorenzo's sweatpants, which he had to roll up 4 times at the waist, and one of his oversized black t-shirts, she padded barefoot into the massive living room. The penthouse was quiet, save for the low hum of the central heating. On the glass dining table, Lorenzo had left his secure laptop and a stack of files Dominic had dropped off earlier that night. Chloe gravitated toward the table. Her anxiety always demanded an outlet, and for her, numbers were the ultimate grounding mechanism. Numbers didn't shoot at you. Numbers didn't lie. They just had to be arranged correctly. She opened the laptop. Lorenzo had left it unlocked. An incredible display of trust, or perhaps a test. She pulled up the digital duplicates of the red ledger and began cross-referencing the Brooklyn Southport accounts with the offshore banking manifests. For 2 hours, the only sound in the room was the rapid clicking of the mouse and her occasional mutters. She traced the missing $150,000 increments. Carlo was indeed skimming them, funneling them into a holding account. But as Chloe dug into the swift routing numbers, her brow furrowed. The money wasn't going directly to Matteo Rossi. It was bouncing through a corporate frontier real estate holding firm registered in Delaware called Whitman & Lowe Equities. "What are you doing up?" Chloe jumped, nearly knocking over a glass of water. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway of the hall, wearing only a pair of dark sleep pants. His chest was bare, showcasing a terrifyingly beautiful canvas of Inca-large, intricate Sicilian eagle sprawling across his left pectoral and shoulder. I couldn't sleep," Chloe said, her voice catching slightly as she forced her eyes back to the screen. "So I started looking at the routing numbers." Lorenzo walked over, his bare feet silent on the hardwood. He stood behind a chair, leaning over so his chest brushed her shoulder. "And what did my brilliantly clumsy secretary find?" "Oh, Carlo is a thief, but he's not the mastermind," Chloe said, pointing at the screen. She was in her element now, the fear temporarily eclipsed by the puzzle. "Look here, Carlo sent the money to Whitman and Lowe Equities, but Rossi doesn't own Whitman and Lowe." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, staring at the screen. "Who does? It's a shell company. But to authorize transfers over $100,000, the holding bank requires a secondary corporate guarantor signature. A legal backer." Chloe clicked open a scanned PDF at the bank's charter. "The guarantor for Whitman and Lowe is Richard Crane." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Richard," Lorenzo whispered, the name dripping with venom. "Your corporate lawyer?" Chloe nodded slowly. "Carlo was just the button pusher. Richard Crane is the architect. He's been moving your money to fund Rossi's expansion, likely in exchange for a massive cut and a promise of power when Rossi eventually tried to overthrow you." Lorenzo stepped back, running a hand over his face. Richard Crane wasn't just an employee, he was a consigliere in the corporate world. He had drawn up Lorenzo's father's will. "He knows all my accounts," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifying a deadpan. "He knows the security codes for the shipping containers. If Richard is with Rossi, our entire logistics network is compromised." He looked down at Chloe. The awe in his eyes was unmistakable. 5 auditors, a team of seasoned Mafia underbosses, and none of them had caught it. It took a girl in oversized sweatpants with a penchant for spilling coffee to unravel a corporate coup. "You," Lorenzo murmured, reaching down and gently cupping her face. He forced her to look up at him. "You are extraordinary." Chloe's breath hitched. His thumb stroked her cheek, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. The dangerous Mafia boss was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. "Lorenzo, beep, beep, beep." A shrill, deafening alarm shattered the quiet of the penthouse. Red emergency lights began strobing along the ceiling. Lorenzo's hand dropped from her face, instantly replaced by the ruthless killer she had seen in the alley. He grabbed her arm, hauling her out of the chair. "What is it?" Chloe cried over the noise. "A perimeter breach alarm," Lorenzo snarled, pulling a hidden panel off the wall to reveal a biometric safe. He pressed his thumb to the scanner, pulling out a tactical shotgun and 2 handguns. He shoved one of the handguns into the waistband of his sweatpants and racked the shotgun. "Richard Crane knows about this safe house," Lorenzo said, his jaw locked in a grim line. "He knows I brought you here. They aren't waiting for tomorrow. Rossi is hitting us right now." Before Chloe could process the terror, a massive explosion shook the building, blowing the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse entirely off their hinges. Smoke and drywall dust billowed into the living room, and the heavy, metallic sound of tactical boots echoed in the hallway. "Get behind the kitchen island. Do not move, do not make a sound," Lorenzo ordered, stepping in front of her, his body a literal shield between her and the smoke. The clumsy girl had found the traitor, but now the traitor had found them. The air in the penthouse was instantly thick with the acrid smell of C4 and pulverized drywall. Through the smoke, the red strobe of the emergency lights painted the living room in chaotic, violent flashes. "Stay down," Lorenzo roared over the ringing in Chloe's ears. He racked a shell into the tactical shotgun, the clack-clack sound slicing through the haze. 3 men stepped through the ruined doorway. They weren't wearing street clothes. They were outfitted in tactical gear, carrying suppressed submachine guns. Richard Crane had used the stolen corporate funds to hire top-tier mercenaries. The first man didn't even have time to raise his weapon. Lorenzo fired. The deafening blast of the shotgun in the enclosed space was physically painful, but the mercenary was thrown backward into the hallway as if hit by a freight train. "Flank right," one of the remaining men shouted. Bullets chewed through the marble of the kitchen island where Chloe was huddled. chunks of stone rained down on her hair and shoulders. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands over her ears, trying to make herself as small as possible. This wasn't a movie. The marble vibrating against her back was real. The heat of the tracers zipping over her head was real. Lorenzo dropped to one knee, firing twice more. Another mercenary went down, but a third was moving fast along the wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to get an angle on Lorenzo's blind spot. Chloe opened her eyes. From her position on the floor, she could see the mercenary's heavy combat boots stepping over the shattered remains of a glass coffee table. He was raising his gun, aiming directly at the back of Lorenzo's head. Lorenzo was reloading, his fingers flying with practiced lethal precision, but he was a second too slow. "Lorenzo!" Chloe screamed. She didn't think. Her body moved on pure adrenaline-fueled instinct. She grabbed the heaviest thing within her reach, a cast-iron Le Creuset Dutch oven, sitting on the lower shelf of the island, and hurled it across the floor with all her might. Because it was Chloe, her aim was terrible. The heavy iron pot didn't hit the mercenary. Instead, it smashed directly into the steel support pillar of the massive, custom-built wine rack lining the dining wall. The structural integrity failed instantly. With a sound like a collapsing glacier, 300 bottles of vintage red wine and heavy oak shelving came crashing down. The avalanche of glass and liquid slammed into the mercenary, burying him under hundreds of pounds of debris and slicking the floor with what looked like a sea of blood. The man went down, his weapon discharging wildly into the ceiling, taking out the main chandelier. Lorenzo spun around, his shotgun leveled, only to see the immediate threat neutralized by a mountain of shattered cabinet. He looked at the wreckage, then down at Chloe, who was staring at her hands in shock. "I missed," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are the most beautifully destructive force of nature I have ever met," Lorenzo said, hauling her up by the waist. "We need to move. That was just a vanguard." He dragged her toward the rear of the penthouse down a narrow corridor lined with modern art. At the end of the hall was a heavily reinforced steel door. Lorenzo pressed his bloody thumb to a scanner, and the door hissed open, revealing a private, dedicated elevator shaft. "Get in," he ordered, shoving her inside the steel-plated box. "What about you?" she panicked, grabbing his arm as he tried to step back into the hall. "I have to initiate the server wipe. If Richard Crane gets his hands on the physical drives in the study, he owns the global shipping lanes. I'll be 30 seconds behind you." "No!" "Lorenzo, please, they'll kill you." He stopped, framing her dirt-streaked face in his hands. His thumbs wiped away the dust from her cheeks. The violence in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a fierce, undeniable possession. "I survived 32 years in the Sicilian Mafia, Chloe. I am not going to die the night I finally found the one person worth staying alive for. Go." He hit the descent button and stepped back. The steel doors closed, severing her from his sight. The elevator plummeted in stomach-dropping silence. Chloe sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, sobbing into the oversized fabric of his shirt. For 2 terrifying minutes, she was entirely alone in the dark. When the doors finally chimed open, she was in the sub-basement parking garage. Dominic Russo was standing there, a smoking assault rifle in his hands, surrounded by the bodies of 4 of Rossi's men. A black, armored Mercedes was idling behind him. "Where is he?" Dominic barked, his eyes wide with panic. "Where's Enzo?" Before Chloe could answer, a tremendous explosion rocked the foundation of the building. Dust rained from the concrete ceiling of the garage. The penthouse had just detonated. "No," Chloe breathed, her legs giving out. Dominic grabbed her, hauling her toward the car. "We have to go. Now. We can't leave him." She screamed, fighting against Dominic's grip, her bare feet slipping on the concrete. Suddenly, the heavy metal door to the emergency stairwell burst open. Lorenzo stumbled out. His chest was heaving, his white shirt was stained with soot and blood, and he was carrying a heavy black server drive under one arm. He looked like a demon walking out of hell. Chloe didn't wait for Dominic to let go. She broke free and ran across the garage, throwing herself into Lorenzo's arms. He dropped the server drive and caught her, lifting her off her feet. He buried his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. He was alive. "I'm here, Piccola," he rasped, his voice raw. "I'm here." 48 hours later. The 48th floor of Moretti Logistics was pristine. The glass was polished, the marble shone, and the silence was back. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a trap waiting to snap shut. In the grand executive boardroom, Richard Crane sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He wore a smug, untouchable smile, flanked by Matteo Rossi and 3 other high-ranking Mafia captains who had decided to turn their coats. "It's a tragedy," Richard was saying smoothly, adjusting his silk tie. "Lorenzo's sudden passing in the gas leak at his Tribeca residence is a massive blow to the organization. However, the business of the ports must continue. As his legally appointed guarantor, I am activating the succession clause. Mr. Rossi will be stepping in as the interim head of logistics." "I accept this heavy burden," Rossi smirked, leaning back in the plush leather chair. "First order of business, we double the transit fees on the Brooklyn lines." "You aren't doubling anything, Matteo." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. The color drained from Richard Crane's face instantly. The pen in his hand clattered onto the table. Lorenzo Moretti walked into the room. He was wearing a flawless 3-piece midnight blue suit. He looked like a king returning to reclaim a stolen throne. The air in the room turned to ice, but it wasn't just Lorenzo who commanded the room. Walking exactly 1 step behind him was Chloe Jenkins. She was no longer wearing thrift store trench coats or scuffed loafers. She wore a tailored slate-gray pencil skirt and a silk crimson blouse that screamed power. Her hair was blown out perfectly, and she held a sleek leather tablet. She looked terrifyingly competent. Dominic Russo stepped in behind them, locking the boardroom doors. The click echoed like a guillotine dropping. "Enzo," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. "Thank God. The news said what I paid them to say, Richard," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice dropping to that lethal, quiet register. He walked slowly around the table. "Did you really think a few hired guns and a bomb could take my city from me?" Rossi stood up, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Dominic's gun was out and pointed at the center of Rossi's forehead before the man could even clear his holster. "Sit down, Matteo," Lorenzo commanded softly. Rossi slowly sank back into his chair, sweating profusely. Lorenzo stopped behind Richard Crane's chair. He leaned down, placing both hands on the table. "You used my own accountant to skim my money. You used my own lawyer credentials to build a shell company. You almost had me. Lorenzo, please, be reasonable." "I can explain. I don't need you to explain," Lorenzo said. He glanced up. "Miss Jenkins, the floor is yours." Chloe stepped forward. She didn't trip. She didn't drop the tablet. Her heart was hammering, but she felt Lorenzo's eyes on her, grounding her. "At 4 a.m. yesterday morning," Chloe began, her voice steady and clear, projecting across the silent room, "I gained access to the Whitman and Lowe Equities master accounts. Because Mr. Crane used a remarkably lazy encryption key, his dog's name and his birth year, I was able to reroute the stolen $2 million back into the Moretti Logistics main operating fund." Richard Crane gasped, lunging for his laptop. "You couldn't have." "The 2-factor authentication was tied to your corporate phone," Chloe continued coldly, "which Dominic disabled via the carrier network. Furthermore, I took the liberty of compiling an itemized dossier of every illegal bribe Mr. Time Rossi has paid to port officials over the last 5 years, funded by Mr. Crane's shell company. I sent it to the FBI field office 10 minutes ago. The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe had just dismantled a multi-million-dollar mafia coup with a tablet and basic arithmetic. Rossi stared at her, pure hatred in his eyes. "You're a dead woman. You hear me? A dead woman." Lorenzo moved so fast it was a blur. He grabbed Rossi by the throat, hauling the massive man out of his chair and slamming him face first into the mahogany table. "If you ever look at her again," Lorenzo whispered into Rossi's ear, his amber eyes burning with a demonic fury, "I will cut your eyes out. Dominic, take them to the basement." "We're done here." Dominic hauled Rossi up. 2 more of Lorenzo's loyal men entered the room, dragging a sobbing Richard Crane away. Within a minute, the boardroom was empty, save for Lorenzo and Chloe. The heavy doors clicked shut. The adrenaline slowly drained from Chloe's system. Her knees suddenly felt like water. She let out a shaky breath, placing the tablet on the table. "I did it," she whispered. "You did," Lorenzo said. He walked over to her, his intense gaze softening entirely. He stopped inches away, looking down at her with a mixture of reverence and burning desire. "You saved my company. You saved my life. Twice." "So," Chloe said, looking down at her new designer shoes, suddenly feeling shy. "Does this mean my probationary period is over? Because Brenda from the temp agency is going to want a review." Lorenzo let out a low, rumbling laugh. He reached out, wrapping his strong arm around her waist and putting her flush against his chest. "You're fired, Chloe," he murmured, his lips hovering mere inches from hers. Her breath hitched. "Fired?" "Oh, I don't sleep with my secretaries," Lorenzo whispered, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "It's bad for business. And what am I now?" she asked, her heart racing as she looked up into his golden eyes. "You are mine," he declared softly, leaning down. "My partner, my queen. The only person in the world who can break my crystal, spill my espresso, and steal my heart in the same week." When his lips finally met hers, it was a collision of 2 completely different worlds. It was fierce, consuming, and perfect. Chloe closed her eyes, melting into the kiss, knowing that she had walked into a lion's den to pay off a debt, but had ended up owning the entire kingdom. And as Lorenzo's hand tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, Chloe's elbow bumped the table, knocking a stack of highly classified port manifestos onto the floor. They scattered everywhere. Lorenzo broke the kiss, looking down at the mess. Then he looked back at Chloe, a helpless, adoring smile spreading across his face. "I'll pick those up," Chloe whispered, her cheeks burning red. "Leave them," Lorenzo said, pulling her back in. "The Empire can wait." Did Chloe's clumsy charm and razor-sharp mind win you over? From spilling scalding espresso on a ruthless mafia boss to dismantling a multi-million-dollar corporate coup in an oversized t-shirt, this proves that sometimes the biggest game changers don't wear capes. They wear scuffed loafers and trip over rugs. If you loved this heart-pounding journey of danger, betrayal, and a romance that literally dodged bullets, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to show your support for Chloe and Lorenzo's unstoppable partnership. Share this video with your friends who love a spicy, action-packed mafia romance, where the underestimated girl saves the day. And if you want more thrilling, real-life-inspired storytelling, full of twists, tension, and epic love stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. What would you have done in Chloe's shoes? Drop a comment below.